Back in 1886, a mining engineer named John T. Reed heard a story that completely changed the way he looked at the Nevada desert. The Paiute people told him a legend about a race of giants who once lived in the area, towering beings who were said to be violent, powerful, and eventually wiped out after a long and brutal war. According to the story, the final showdown happened near Lovelock Cave, where the giants were trapped and killed. Reed didn't brush it off as folklore, because something about it felt real, and that belief pushed him to take a deeper interest in what might be hidden inside the cave. That curiosity eventually led to official excavations, first in 1912 and later in 1924, both carried out by the University of California. Thousands of artifacts were reportedly recovered, but the most puzzling discoveries weren't tools or weapons. They were human remains, almost human at least. Skeletons measuring anywhere from 8 to 10 feet tall were said to have been found during the digs, and these remains later became associated with what are now called the Lovelock Giants. Even though mainstream science tends to dismiss stories like this, legends of enormous humans exist across countless cultures, and there's a growing number of people who believe those legends might be rooted in something real. The big question, though, is obvious. If giant skeletons have supposedly been found all over the United States and even around the world, why aren't they displayed in museums, taught in schools, or discussed in history books? Some argue it's because the existence of giants doesn't fit the accepted version of human history, so it's been quietly ignored or covered up. That idea sounds extreme, but it keeps resurfacing because the stories never really go away. To be fair, giants actually do appear in ancient texts more often than people realize. In Indian mythology, especially in the Vedas, there's mention of an ancient age called the Satya Yuga, or the Golden Age, when humanity lived in harmony. Humans during this era were believed to be massive, sometimes described as standing over 30 feet tall. In the Old Testament, the Nephilim are mentioned in the book of Genesis as mighty beings who lived on earth long ago. One interpretation claims they were the offspring of fallen angels and human women, which would explain why they were described as both powerful and feared. Giants also appear throughout the Book of Enoch, a religious text found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. According to that book, the Nephilim lived before the Great Flood, a detail that matches other ancient traditions. The Bible later introduces one of the most famous giants of all time, Goliath. He was a Philistine warrior who challenged the Israelites only to be defeated by David, armed with nothing but a sling and faith. Goliath was said to stand anywhere from 7 to 11 feet tall and may have descended from the Anakim, a group believed to trace their lineage back to the Nephilim. If you go back even further, ancient Sumerian texts describe beings known as the Anunnaki, sometimes portrayed as gods and sometimes as giants. Some modern interpretations suggest they were extraterrestrial visitors from a planet called Nibiru, which supposedly travels through our solar system every few thousand years. Although this idea was dismissed as pseudoscience for decades, recent discussions about a possible Planet 9 lurking beyond Neptune have revived interest. NASA has been searching for this object for years, even though they don't connect it to ancient myths. According to Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki came to Earth because their own planet's environment was failing, and they needed resources like water and gold. When their original workforce rebelled, they allegedly began genetic experiments to create a new labor force. By combining their own DNA with early humans, they created Homo sapiens, referred to in ancient texts as the first men. These humans were bred to work, and over time, worship of the Anunnaki followed naturally, because compared to humans, they seemed godlike. Although forbidden, some Anunnaki reportedly interbred with humans, producing the Nephilim. These same texts describe a catastrophic event when Nibiru passed close to Earth, triggering electromagnetic disturbances, extreme auroras, melting ice caps, and ultimately a global flood. The Anunnaki escaped, but Earth was devastated, leaving only a small number of humans to rebuild. Variations of this flood story appear in cultures all over the world, which makes some people wonder if it's more than coincidence. That brings the focus back to North America, where Native American tribes also preserve stories of giants. The Choctaw spoke of the Nahulo, a race of massive beings known for cannibalism. The Paiute passed down tales of red-haired giants called the Siteka, which literally means tule eaters. These giants were said to have arrived by raft and lived in the Nevada region long before the Paiute. They were aggressive, often eating those they captured in battle, and after years of conflict, the tribes united against them. The final battle, according to Paiute history, ended when the giants were driven into a cave. The entrance was blocked with brush and set on fire, suffocating or burning the remaining CTK inside. Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, daughter of Chief Winnemucca, later wrote about this event, insisting it was history, not legend. She even claimed to own strands of red hair taken from one of the giants. When Lovelock Cave was finally excavated, the findings seemed to echo those stories. There was evidence of intense fire near the entrance, a massive handprint on the cave wall, and over 10,000 artifacts. Some bones showed signs of marrow extraction, which suggested cannibalism. Oversized sandals, clothing too large for normal humans, and reports of mummified remains, one nearly 9 feet tall, added to the mystery. Later newspaper articles even claimed giant skeletons were found in nearby dry lake beds. And it wasn't just Nevada. Ohio's Serpent Mound, a massive prehistoric earthwork, has long been associated with strange phenomena. Nearby discoveries included skeletons over 8 feet tall, some with double rows of teeth and unusually thick skulls. Similar finds were reported across the Midwest, from West Virginia to Missouri, Iowa, and Minnesota. In many cases, newspapers documented these discoveries, and the remains were often sent to the Smithsonian Institution. Out west, California had its own share of giant stories. Skeletons measuring over 8 feet were reportedly found in San Diego and on Catalina Island. One discovery in the 1800s even described a 12-foot skeleton buried with massive tools, carved shells, and quartz sheets etched with symbols. Again, double rows of teeth appeared, a recurring detail in these accounts. Over the past 2 centuries, more than 1,000 reports of giant skeletons have surfaced across North America. They've been found in mounds, caves, graves, and ancient battlefields, often documented by newspapers, scientists, and local historians. The Smithsonian is mentioned repeatedly as the recipient of these remains, which leads to the question that refuses to disappear. If all of this is true, where are the bones now? For decades, the Smithsonian wasn't seriously suspected of hiding anything. But by the mid-20th century, some researchers began to notice a pattern. Skeletons were discovered, documented, shipped off, and then seemingly vanished. Whether that points to a deliberate cover-up, poor preservation, or simple exaggeration is still debated. But because these stories span continents, cultures, and centuries, they continue to challenge the idea that giants were nothing more than myth. Back in 1892, a strange discovery was made in a place called Crump's Cave in Alabama. Inside the cave, researchers found ancient wooden coffins, along with several other artifacts. Because this kind of burial didn't really line up with what historians knew about Native American practices, the find immediately raised questions. Native Americans traditionally didn't use coffins or caskets, so the whole thing felt out of place. Still, the discovery was taken seriously, documented properly, and eventually sent to the Smithsonian Institution for Preservation. Decades later, in 1950, a researcher named Frederick J. Pohl wrote to the Smithsonian asking about those coffins. His curiosity made sense, because the burial style didn't match what was taught about indigenous cultures in North America. But the reply he got was strange. The Smithsonian said they couldn't locate the specimens, even though their own records clearly showed that the items had been received. That response alone raised eyebrows, but the story didn't end there. In 1992, another researcher, David Barron, followed up on the same mystery. When he contacted the Smithsonian, he was told that the coffins weren't coffins at all. Instead, he was told they were wooden troughs, the kind used to feed animals like cattle or horses. But that explanation immediately fell apart, because before Europeans arrived, there were no cattle, horses, or pigs in North America. Even if there had been, why would a feeding trough have a lid? When Barron pushed back and asked to see the items for himself, he was told he couldn't. Apparently, the artifacts were stored in a warehouse contaminated with asbestos and closed for cleanup. That cleanup, he was told, would take 10 years. 10 years to clean asbestos started to sound less like bad luck and more like avoidance. So naturally, suspicions grew. This leads into a much bigger debate that allegedly began in the late 1800s. Up until 1881, the Smithsonian was led by John Wesley Powell, a respected geologist famous for exploring the Grand Canyon. Powell spent a lot of time with Native American tribes, especially the Winnebago, and he found them thoughtful and intelligent. Because of that, Powell supported the idea that Native Americans were descendants of advanced civilizations and that they once communicated and traded with other cultures across the continent and possibly even across oceans. This idea is known as diffusionism, which suggests that civilizations spread knowledge and culture through contact and exchange. For a while, the Smithsonian supported this view, but things changed when Powell appointed Cyrus Thomas as the director of the Eastern Mound Division. Thomas strongly disagreed with diffusionism. He believed Native Americans were primitive and incapable of long-distance travel or complex cooperation. To him, the idea that indigenous people crossed oceans or maintained contact across large regions was absurd. Thomas supported isolationism, the belief that civilizations developed independently and had little to no contact with others, especially across oceans. Over time, debates within the Smithsonian grew heated, but eventually isolationism won. The Smithsonian officially declared that any archaeological evidence suggesting diffusionism was fraudulent. From that point on, history books painted Native Americans as isolated, primitive societies, and that narrative became dominant. But problems emerged when ancient mound sites in the Midwest were studied more closely. Archaeological evidence showed that the Mississippi River Valley was once home to a highly sophisticated culture. At its peak, the city of Cahokia was larger than most European cities of the same era. That alone contradicted the idea of primitive isolation. Then there was the excavation of the Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma during the 1930s. Inside one burial chamber, archaeologists reportedly found a man over 7 feet tall, buried in armor, alongside thousands of pearls and other valuable artifacts. It was considered one of the largest archaeological treasures ever discovered at the time. The Smithsonian was contacted, but today no one seems to know where the remains went. Many human remains were discarded, and researchers were told that rare artifacts conveniently disintegrated before experts arrived. To make matters worse, after the excavation was finished, dynamite was used to destroy the burial chamber, and the remaining artifacts were allegedly sold off. Similar controversy surrounds the Acambaro artifacts discovered in Mexico. Over 33,000 figurines made of stone and ceramic were uncovered, many of which depicted dinosaurs alongside humans, diverse ethnic groups, and strange hybrid creatures. Initial lab tests suggested the artifacts were thousands of years old. Several archaeologists authenticated the finds, but major institutions, including the Smithsonian, dismissed them as hoaxes. Despite lab dating placing them around 4,500 BC, the Smithsonian claimed they were modern fabrications. When researchers requested records, the files were missing, and the artifacts were locked away from public view. All of this feeds into the idea that the Smithsonian may have literal skeletons in the closet. The phrase usually refers to secrets, but in this case, critics argue it might be quite literal. Stories of giant skeletons found across America, especially in Ohio during the 19th century, fueled public fascination. Newspapers ran sensational stories, although many turned out to be hoaxes. Some discoveries were exaggerated, others staged, and photographs were manipulated, especially in modern times. Science explains that true human giants couldn't exist due to biological limits. Conditions like gigantism and Marfan syndrome can cause extreme height, but they come with severe health problems. The square cube law explains why extremely large humans couldn't survive because bones and organs wouldn't be able to support the increased mass. Still, some reports describe skeletons with unusually thick bones, leading some to wonder whether these were even human. So is there a cover-up? Critics argue that the suppression narrative largely comes from modern writers, and some stories only surface long after the events supposedly happened. That doesn't automatically make them false, but it does invite skepticism. However, isolationism has taken serious hits in recent years. One of the biggest problems is the sweet potato. Sweet potatoes are native to the Americas, yet they were found in Polynesia and dated to around the year 1000. That suggests transoceanic contact long before Columbus. Linguistics strengthens the case because the word for sweet potato in Polynesian languages closely matches words used by indigenous South American tribes. Then there's the chicken DNA evidence. Chicken bones found in Chile were genetically linked to Polynesian chickens and dated to before European contact. Later studies showed shared DNA between Polynesians and indigenous people from Colombia, suggesting human contact across the Pacific centuries ago. There's also evidence suggesting ancient contact from China, India, and the Arab world, along with maps that appear to show the Americas long before Columbus. Even Egyptian mummies were found with traces of tobacco and coca, plants native to the Americas, though mainstream explanations dismiss this as contamination. In 1990, a law was passed requiring federal agencies to return Native American remains to tribes, but the Smithsonian was specifically exempted. That exemption fuels suspicion because it means their collections can remain hidden indefinitely. The broader issue isn't just artifacts or skeletons, but how alternate ideas are treated. When theories challenge established narratives, they're often criticized, marginalized, attacked, and eventually censored. This pattern has played out repeatedly, including with documentaries exploring ancient advanced civilizations. Yet history shows that mainstream timelines have been wrong before. Discoveries like Göbekli Tepe completely rewrote what we thought we knew about early human societies. Debate doesn't block discovery, suppressing it does. As more evidence emerges, the past may turn out to be far more complex than we were taught, even if that makes institutions uncomfortable. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.